Good evening, class. This is Felicia Hodges. This video is about the historical relationship between democracy, government, business, and media based on the views and ideas that were expressed in The Century of the Self four-part series and the documentary Manufacturing Consent. Basically, right out of the gate, watching The Century of Self, it was very educating on the progression of the beliefs of what guides the masses to act and to do things. Basically, most of those ideals started with Sigmund Freud, but on a mutated level of what he considered to be right and true. Basically, he had written his book, and his nephew, Edward Bernays, kind of took that and definitely took into consideration what Sigmund Freud had said and written in his memoirs and in his books, and molded it to what he had actually witnessed with the crowds. So he could, based on the documentary, take an idea or subject matter for one of his clients at the time. Basically, he was what we would call, in our today's standards, a media marketer and public relations manager. He is coined as being the public relations, the birth of public relations. But he basically took those ideals and guided the society that he was in front of, which at the time was the American society, to do or act the way that he was hoping that they would. So in one particular instance, he did a movement at one of the parades with females and smoking. He basically gave 5 debutantes each a cigarette and told them, only smoke them at this time, and he coined a phrase based upon that. It was very interesting to see the transition that he was able to portray, and then also to know that he kind of sparked the product placement in films and different commercials and stuff like that, just to be able to promote certain items or certain products and it was almost like a subliminal message almost. And at that time, obviously, it was more in your face subliminal than anything else. But it's in other research that I've done, I've learned that, people are guided to do what others do. So if they see someone famous doing it, they want to do it too. So to see someone in such an early time take that knowledge and actually utilize it is incredible. The next progression that they saw was basically in psychological, what guides people to have breakdowns, because they were finding that as soldiers were coming home from the wars, they were more psychologically affected. Well, when they got through these different key moments, they were more and more interested in what causes people, to tick. So they would get through all of these different psychological studies. It was very complex and complicated and very misguided, if anything else. And then the Freud stepped in again, not necessarily Edward Bernays, it was actually his cousin Anna. They were under the impression that you could embed into someone social correctness, and that they would be less likely to have these psychological breakdowns and errors. There was a lot of misguided conception about the human personality and psyche, as far as we were very corrupt creatures and we couldn't control ourselves. But in reality, if you go back to all of the different items that they were saying, it's more about masses than self. So in one of the 4-part series, they said that it came to light that when you were suppressing that self, that individuality, that's what were causing so many severe breakdowns. And actually, for example, is 2 of the children that Anna Freud actually was studying and tried to do that whole social suppression technique with, they actually ended up dying one committed suicide in her house, and the other one actually died from alcoholism that he had suffered from since his adult life. So to me, those ideals about the psychological errors in the human race is definitely misguided. But then you switch over to the Manufacturing Consent documentary, and it's very interesting to me to see someone, because he's been very active for decades in his views on the fact that we're only given the information that they want us to have, which is very true. Rupert Murdoch, the documentary on Rupert Murdoch is also another very publicized view of how Fox News in today's society is so corrupt, and they're very right-wing, and they are much guided in their areas of how they want to portray the news. So it's not a hidden fact in today's society. Possibly in that time it was. And if you carefully watch the Manufacturing Consent documentary, you'll see that they do very much try to argue against his views of, you guys only produce what you choose to produce. Here in America, it's more regulated. He wasn't given certain accesses to the media, and then if he was given access, he was very much, if you watch the videos, argued against, flat out called a liar. It's very interesting to see that the beliefs of the society can't handle certain things as a mass majority is still carried over into those types of programs, into the news programs, into, what's going to guide the masses to buy the product that we want. Still today in today's society, what's going to get you the biggest range on your audience and connect with them. And all throughout history, they've kind of been maneuvering to the masses. It's not to an individual. Now, in the fourth part of the Century of Self series, where they're talking about how they were gaining voters for Bill Clinton's run for presidency, it was very interesting to see that they were interested in getting those voters that were swing voters, basically the middle class. What made them happy and what did they want to hear as part of the campaign so that they would vote for this individual or that individual. And so they were polling the public. Again, even though you're getting an individual standpoint, the individuals still all kind of wanted the same things and were interested in the same things. It's very interesting to see that even though people want to be viewed as an individual, even though people want to have their own opinion and do things their own way, they still are guided as a group to do one thing or another. And it's very interesting to see, because then you switch over to the Manufacturing Consent, and you have an individual who's like, I really wish that you guys could see past this because you're missing the point. Here's this one story of Timor, and here's this other story of Cambodia. Well, the only one that you heard about was Cambodia because that was the only one that our government officials found relevant to us as a society, whereas in Timor, the level of genocide was so much more. It's very interesting to see also in Manufacturing Consent where his quote was utilized in a book about free speech. It was a misguided understanding of him supporting the guy's views instead of what it actually was. And that's because as he was talking to the press, or as the press addressed the story, that's what they presented it as. He was supporting the man and not necessarily supporting freedom of speech. Well, that's all I have. Thank you guys so much for your time this evening. Y'all have a great night.